Hey, and welcome to episode 13 of the Fight for the Future live stream. Just at the beginning, I want to remind folks to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell for notifications if you like content like this. That way you'll get notifications when we go live in the future. I also wanted to let people know that we are on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, so if you want to listen to this in podcast form, you can access it there. Links are in the description. And this is kind of new, but you can text live to 68788, and we will text you updates. Again, that's 68788, and text the word live to that number, and we will text you with updates when we go live in the future. Today, I am joined by Sarah Roth-Gaudette, who is Fight for the Future's Executive Director, and Lia Holland, who is Fight for the Future's Campaigns and Communications Director. Today, we're going to be chatting about recent revelations around exactly who was submitting all of those fake net neutrality comments to the FCC, and also about the COVID vaccine patent waiver that was recently announced by the Biden administration, and what that means for patent politics in general. We're going to start off with the patent discussion. So Lia, I'm going to kick the first question to you. Can you give us an overview of what the Biden administration announced on Wednesday and the significance of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be on again with you, Joe. So on Wednesday, the Biden administration announced that they were reversing course on an initiative that had been proposed at the WTO by a coalition of over 100 countries, calling for a waiver on intellectual property rights that are stopping the sharing of life-saving medical knowledge and information around the pandemic. So we're talking about things like vaccines, vaccine manufacturing information, vaccine tests, ventilators, and other really essential things that are in short supply the world over, to a certain extent because of intellectual property restrictions and patents on those devices and that knowledge. So the Trump administration had sided with these intellectual property, copyright, patent lobbyists from the pharmaceutical and other industries. Really, I could refer to them as like a copyright cabal, because anything that threatens to open up knowledge and information in this country is attacked on all sides from anybody who, or any industry that makes a lot of money from keeping knowledge and information and access away from people. So the Trump administration had said, no, we're not going to share this life-saving medical information with poorer countries in which people are dying disproportionately without access to medicines and care and essential, really essential technologies to save them from the pandemic. And fortunately, the Biden administration did not cave to that same lobbyist pressure and stepped up at the WTO on Wednesday to say, we support this waiver. We are joining this coalition of 100 countries, and we are going to get out of the way and let this be negotiated as a policy of the WTO so that we can get life-saving medical information to people. And that's hugely significant in the fight against the pandemic, not only because it will, not only because, most importantly, it will save untold lives, thousands, tens of thousands, potentially millions of lives, but also because it takes, because the way that I'm careful because I want to be sure to say this right, because the biggest threat to the vaccines and to a return to a society in which we don't have to distance and worry about this pandemic anymore, is variants evolving in populations where where COVID is running rampant. And so if these other countries aren't able to effectively fight the pandemic, the likelihood that some new variant will come out that will just sweep through and wipe out us all increases and increases. So really, it is fundamentally in the best interests of everyone, including the people who own these intellectual property rights, to make sure that the species isn't wiped out. And that might be a bit of an exaggeration, but that's really the point here, is that like everyone has a strong interest in defeating this pandemic. And up until Wednesday, the US had stood in opposition to to releasing the biggest tools in fighting that to the countries that need them most. So it's incredibly significant and exciting. And so now that waiver goes to negotiations at the WTO, which is a whole other ballgame, which I'm sure we'll talk about more.
So something that I thought was really interesting, reading about this whole situation, was that stock prices for all of the companies that are producing the vaccine, that their stock prices fell after this announcement. And it felt like really gross to me. It seems as if like the market is sort of indicating that human life is less valuable than intellectual property control, according to shareholders. How do we change that narrative around intellectual property in such a like brutal and heartless like climate like that?
I mean, I when you talk about it like that, I just have to say, hello, capitalism. We see you there among us again, being brutal and heartless and putting like margins and bottom lines and the potential to profit from a vaccine that's taxpayer funded and funnel all of that money into investors' pockets as more important than thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of lives. And I think that there's a lot of money invested in preserving intellectual property rights for the reason that they are so profitable, and generally not profitable to the creators themselves, but to the companies that end up holding those patents, those copyrights, etc., and making a heck of a lot of money from them. And who this is hurting right now is those companies, not the individuals, not the creators. So the shift of the narrative around intellectual property is definitely a major uphill battle in which we're fighting the best of the best in terms of lobbyists, in terms of PR, in terms of this machine that is engineered to like say all of the focus group tested lines to turn people off of imagining a world where copyright and intellectual property are treated differently and with a people and creator first approach. So it's uphill, but that's a cause that FIGHT is increasingly invested in and excited about. And I think that changing the narrative, we just need to keep, uplifting the stories of the people who are being harmed in these absolutely disgusting moments in which they're waving their hands in the air saying, oh, but our profits, we should let millions of people die. And also pushing back on the PR machine that gets going whenever we say something like that to tell us that we don't know what we're talking about. Because while law is complicated and patents are complicated, what's happening right in front of our eyes is something that we can see. It's right there and it's real, and we should be naming it. So I'm looking forward to us doing more of that.
So earlier this week, we posted a Twitter thread about the RIAA, APA, and MPAA sending lobbyists to try and stop this. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, totally. So the RIAA is the Recording Industry Association of America. The APA is the American Publishers Association, and the MPAA is the Motion Picture Association of America. And so if you're a little confused hearing that, lobbyists for film publishing and music are having their lobbyists try to kill a bill about life-saving medical technology in poorer countries, you'd be right to be a little bit confused and a little bit upset about that. Like when you, when you buy a movie or buy a book, you don't want to think that your money is going into the pockets of people who are saying, by all means, let the poor people die. But unfortunately, this goes back to that copyright cabal that I mentioned earlier. The RIAA, APA, and MPAA are representing, or seem to represent, the interests of the major stakeholders in the intellectual property of artists. So again, investors as opposed to the artists and creators themselves. And so they are uniting with the pharmaceutical industry lobbyists and apparently going in and saying things like, oh, if you pass this waiver, it will hurt culture workers. Like, musicians have already been so harmed by this pandemic. Like, why would you release this medical technology? It's going to hurt musicians more, which makes no sense. Is disingenuous. And then there's an article in The Intercept about this that came out last week, in which the which one was it? One of these three said that that musicians essentially were like that there were clauses in here that specifically would harm, you know, individual creators who definitely are struggling during the pandemic. And then when shown a clause in the proposal that specifically says that like culture works are excluded from this is not about that, and that, you know, the copyright and intellectual property of film, music, publishing are safe, they just ghosted. They just didn't answer. Which frankly isn't surprising, because the argument that they were making was fallacious at best. So, you know, we're obviously at Fight a group that very much identifies as, you know, as musicians, authors, activists, and we put our designers, we put our creativity, filmmakers too. Shout out to you, Joe. You're amazing. And so we very much identify with this group of folks who are being deeply misrepresented by these lobbyists, and really like in our name, and with like the struggles that capitalism and these like exploitative, extractive, and like industry gatekeepers are imposing on us. They're saying that we should not save people and we should let people needlessly die.
And just to be clear, like, the move that the Biden administration made is to loosen restrictions on intellectual property surrounding the vaccine, not intellectual property in general, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's for vaccine-related technology, time limited for the pandemic. It's very, very specific and very clear. And yet,
Yeah, that's so bizarre. So it's less. It seems to me less like the MPAA, RIAA, and these are so hard, and APA, like all tongue twisters.
all these A's, yeah.
You know, being legitimately concerned for their intellectual properties. It seems more like it's copyright maximalists sort of coalescing around trying to stop this one thing. And even more strangely, like, it's medical related. Like, these are entertainment industry like entities. They have no like knowledge on medicine. It's really bizarre, and super gross.
Yeah, they haven't. I mean, like, why they're doing this is because there is an alliance from amongst all of these companies that exploit intellectual property of any creators, inventors, etc. Inventors on the, you know, like on the side of medical technology and what have you, and profit from it. And like they just have this pact, some sort of weird, creepy blood oath to come to each other's defense, no matter what it is. And so anytime there's any threat to intellectual property anywhere in this country, you're going to see all of these, you know, dinosaurs trotting out the same old tricks to try to stop any giving of any inch anywhere in copyright and intellectual property in this country.
So, like, all that said, could this pave the way for more life-saving treatments to be shared globally?
Potentially, yeah. I think that, I mean, in terms of COVID, obviously, yes. Like, this move is finally the U.S. getting out of the way, so that there is a road and we can see it to COVID information and technology specifically being shared. But I also think that there's a larger thought process happening here. And I think, again, that's what the copyright maximalists are afraid of, is that we're looking at these this life-saving information. We're looking at the statistics of the people that are dying, and you even think about like insulin in this country and how messed up that is. And with COVID, we're being forced to confront the fact that, like, in the name of IP and in the name of, you know, this stock market that's doesn't track at all how people are actual human beings are living, surviving, or not in the world. We just don't have, like, we're thinking about this in a new way, and in a more human-centered way, as opposed to a business-centered way. And I think that has a lot of potential to open things up, and also the disgust generally with the people who are opposed to this sort of life-saving measure is doing a lot of work for us. Those of us who are pro saving lives as opposed to pro letting people suffer and die.
And I think one revelation that could come out of this move that I hope to see is like a realization that, oh, okay, we can share stuff more freely, and it doesn't mean that your company suddenly doesn't exist. Like, the more knowledge we share, the better, and you can still develop this technology. It's not a zero-sum situation. Like, we can globally share information and survive as companies at the same time.
Yeah, I think like that's absolutely true. Although it sort of seems like right now what is survival to these big companies isn't turning a profit, being able to pay your employees at the end of the day, and like having a company that's operating sustainably and confidently into the future. It's like their metric of success is like obscene profit to investors, obscene salaries to their C-suite executives, and and that has led to so many like detrimental and exploitative practices that this is just like a particularly disgusting illustration of. So
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
So where else could we see looser intellectual property restrictions that are helpful to like global society, where the sharing of information is actually benefiting many, many people?
There's so many places. Maybe I'll point to one specifically, which is around folks who are familiar with our work may have tuned in for our campaign to our library campaign, essentially to allow libraries to move into the digital era without being subjected to like egregious fees and licensing restrictions in order to offer digital learning materials to their patrons. And like that argument there is also one that's based in, or the argument against that is also one that's based in copyright and again in like making these very large profits. So that would be that would be a really great change to see, like that, you know, we can have information, it can exist digitally, it can be, you know, shared in the same way as, you know, a paper book or what have you, and that potentially we have like global repositories so that other countries can access that information too, even if they don't have the same library infrastructure of the United States. And I'm just dreaming here at this point, but it sure seems like, you know, especially with the internet, especially with like global connectivity, that so much is behind needing to have a high income in order to access it, and that just, you know, isn't fair or equitable for the majority of humanity. And there's a lot of potential here to change that easily, were it not for so many gatekeepers, again, putting their profits above humanity.
So this is the last question I've got on like the intellectual property discussion here, but so like for people who are concerned about the intellectual property waiver process, given, you know, all that we've discussed, what can people expect next? And like, are we all set to share life-saving medical knowledge with poorer countries now, or do you think that this is sort of a one-time deal?
Well, there are a couple of different levels on which to answer that question. The first of which is that specifically for COVID, all that has happened so far is that the US got its big ass out of the way. And so we're now moving to a phase at the WTO where negotiations are happening around the COVID TRIPS waiver to allow all this life-saving medical knowledge and technology to be shared. So we've finally agreed that yes, we would like to share it. And now we are at the point of, okay, how do we share it? And so we're frankly expecting a new wave of really egregious behavior from lobbyists trying to undercut and kill this agreement in negotiations. So the fight is definitely not over. It's absolutely something to still stay tuned into, especially if this conversation has made you even a modicum as mad as I am about all of it. So it's not over. We're going to continue to, exert pressure for or push back on the wave of lobbyists that are going to continue that may have lost this round, but are gearing up even more for the next. So that's one level. And then on the other level of is this going beyond COVID? Again, this seems to be changing more how we're thinking about things than any actual policy. So I would say for that, it's more of a wait and see. And if folks want to sort of contribute to the mind shift that we have the potential to be doing right now based on this instance with the pandemic in particular, I think that talking about this just with the people around you and within your companies that you work for or what have you, just about how egregious this is, and that intellectual property interest is not human interest, even if they try to hide behind starving artist human shields or what have you. So I'm hopeful, but this one is for sure a long haul. So we're here for it and ready for the next round too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lia. And we're going to shift to net neutrality, but feel free to jump in at any point. So this question is directed at Sarah. So right now we're going to be discussing sort of this big news story that broke recently where it was revealed exactly who and how was submitting this massive trove of fake net neutrality comments. But I just want to back up a little bit to give people background so they can maybe contextualize and understand. And if maybe they don't know the whole story, it would help them understand what we're talking about. But Sarah, could you please give us some background on the most recent net neutrality fight and an overview of exactly what happened with the FCC comment system?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Hello, folks. Well, maybe I can start at the very beginning, which is, for those of us that need a little brushing up or who, weren't following Fight for the Future or the net neutrality campaign super closely, though it was, it became such a huge issue culturally that, was hard to avoid completely, but, still a relatively complex technological kind of issue that became really critical technological policy. But net neutrality is the principle that everyone should have access to websites and apps, preventing internet providers like Comcast and Verizon from creating fast lanes to certain types of content, censoring content, or throttling traffic, and even sometimes outright blocking access to their competitors' products. And I mean, the principle has guided the World Wide Web from the very beginning and has been protected at various times by federal policy under Republican and Democratic leadership since the early 2000s. It's definitely a kind of transpartisan issue for a long time. And internet providers, of course, ignored this policy and did all that they could to destroy net neutrality protections over the years. But finally, after massive public outcry, including the Internet Slowdown Day that Fight for the Future led on, where 5 million comments were submitted to the FCC. Tactics like a week-long occupying of the FCC by protesters, or blocking then FCC Commissioner Tom Wheeler's driveway. The Obama FCC issued the Open Internet Order, so that was 2015, in order to kind of codify this principle. But then in 2017, 2016, President Trump was elected, and then shortly after, he named former Verizon lawyer Ajit Pai to be the FCC chair. And he, his first order of business on behalf of the cable companies was to propose rolling back these rules, creating a new rule that would essentially allow the cable companies to violate net neutrality. In fact, it went so far as to preempt the states from doing anything stronger, and it removed most of the power that the FCC had to watchdog the cable companies. This regulatory body that he led, he basically made it so his FCC really wouldn't have very much power. And then as part of the process, he opened up another comment period at the FCC, and that's where the story that came out that broke yesterday kind of begins.
Sorry, I took a second to unmute there.
Okay.
Could you give us a little could you explain what the revelation was, because it broke, I think, on Wednesday, that the New York Attorney General's office basically figured out exactly what was going on with the comment system and who it was. But maybe explain a little bit about sort of what was going on with the comment system. This was in the second phase of the net neutrality fight, where we were submitting comments or facilitating the submission of comments for people who care about net neutrality, as well alongside other organizations. But there was this huge influx of very suspect and bizarre comments that were being submitted. And even in some cases, comments were being submitted on behalf of deceased people who couldn't have possibly submitted them. Can you explain that situation and then sort of connect that to the recent news about the New York Attorney General figuring out exactly what was going on in that situation?
Yeah, I can try to do my best. We're still learning, and we're hoping to do some FOIAs and things to try to learn even more. We were helping folks to submit comments through Battle for the Net, through the FCC's comment system, and I think we were the first organization and first folks to first notice that there were a slew of really suspicious looking comments. The docket is the FCC is open, and you can see what's there. We put together a blog post with our findings. We expected there to be this, frankly, and unfortunately, this isn't this. We should talk more about this probably, but it's not uncommon to do this kind of what we call people call astroturfing, right? It's sort of like the fake grassroots. It can come in a bunch of different forms. This is what was uncovered, I think, is pretty common and the worst type of form of it. But our blog post then, we shared that with friends who were journalists and whatnot, and led to some media investigations. And they were finding that these were really suspicious looking comments coming in favor of Ajit Pai's rules and of rolling back net neutrality, which was also sort of shocking because we can talk more about this, but it's a wildly popular policy. And so, when we started hearing from some folks directly too, that were emailing us saying, I never filled out this form, and yet I'm seeing my name on the docket, because they could look it up. So we were kind of wondering, well, sometimes people don't always remember what petition they signed quickly. So, sometimes we hear from folks that they don't think they signed it, and we look it up and they did, and, they remember. So we built a really, we just decided things were kind of moving slowly in terms of the investigations, and we decided to try to take matters into our own hands. And I remember this at the time. I was the COO, but our co-founder, Holmes Wilson, had an idea to just build a really simple tool that would allow people to look up their names in the docket to see if a comment had been submitted in their name. And we had just come off of a big day of action ourselves, where we were, spreading the word about the opportunity to weigh in at the FCC, working with partner organizations and a bunch of smaller websites and stuff to get their visitors and users to submit comments. And we were exhausted, remember, because he was like, let's build this tool. We were all like, oh my God. And our CTO at the time, I think, was like about to go, take a couple of days off or something like that. And our co-founder, Holmes, was like pretty new to trying to teach himself how to code. But I think he did most of it himself, because he was determined to get it up. And we called it, we put it on a domain called comcastroturf.com. I think that was one of our best moves because, well, I'll say why momentarily, but it was essentially a tool that allowed internet users, folks, to check whether their personal information had been stolen and used to submit a fake comment. And people were responding like, oh my God, like, not only is my name on there and I never signed it, but yeah, my deceased husband or something. And this is just, it was like really terrible for folks to discover that kind of thing. People felt really like terribly violated. And we assumed, okay, somebody, essentially, bought themselves a list of, names and emails and things that were circulating on the dark web from one of the big, occasional, unfortunately, very, frequent kind of hacks we find out about at the big companies with our personal information, and used it to submit fake comments. As a side note, I mentioned the ComcastroTurf name. Comcast sent us like a week or so later, a cease and desist notice because of our use of the word, of Comcast, and in an attempt to get us to take down the site. And we thought that was like a gift. We were like, we told everybody we knew on the internet that this has happened, and and we consulted some lawyer friends, and basically decided to keep it. And there was never any. It was just all bluster or whatever. It never amounted to very much. But
the screenshot that Evan, our deputy director, tweeted out yesterday of like, if Comcast would like to discuss this in court, we'd be happy to see them there. Like,
we'll meet you there. Right?
Let's go. So great.
Yeah. And so when people were contacting us, we were still kind of like, it's just, we got to make sure that these people like didn't sign this mistakenly. But it was starting to become pretty clear. The other moment I remember is that our campaigner at the time, Layla, she found a bunch of people, like just used the FCC docket and looked up a bunch of people in her area in Florida where she lived, and basically was like, I can just get on my bike and ride around and knock on their doors and ask them if they signed this. And so she spent an afternoon kind of riding around talking to folks, and coming out of that, and the people who had contacted us directly, we put together a letter from dozens of people, victims who had had their names and addresses stolen and used to submit fraudulent comments. And we had a petition, tens of thousands of people on it, all, directed to FCC, to Ajit Pai, to investigate the fraud. He never really did anything, of course, but we did succeed in getting Congress to investigate. There were multiple bipartisan letters. There was a Government Accountability Office review. So it was, and of course, we were in the midst of this fight to defend the open internet order, and so we were saying this, all along, like, this can't move forward. This process has been totally corrupted. It did eventually get repealed, net neutrality and the order Ajit order passed. But we were the most, which is not, shocking if you've gotten to know our organization. It's unlikely that we will just kind of put up a petition and move on. Like, we were very aggressive about bringing this up every chance we got throughout the process, pushing to get sort of maximum accountability, and never let it go.
So, and it also sounds like, well, from what I remember, not only did it go to congressional investigations, but it also went to several state attorneys general's offices for investigation. And more recently, one of them has come forward with some results, right?
Yes, exactly. So then, fast forward, I can't remember when we first found out about the way we found out about the first, about the investigation from the New York Attorney General's office was being contacted by them ourselves. We were subpoenaed through the process because we had facilitated people sending in comments and had submitted comments ourselves. And so unlike the cease and desist letter, that was, I got to admit, not quite as fun to receive, even though, of course, we knew, that everything we had done was totally, above board, and, it represented real people, who cared about net neutrality. Like, that's just kind of a scary thing to have happen. And frankly, not only was scary and distracting for us as staff people at an organization, but, also, there were just like, we had to hire a lawyer, we had to figure out what was going to be necessary in order to comply with the subpoena. But, we also really, it was important, of course, that we protect the privacy of our supporters and members. And so we wanted to give away as little information to them as possible from that perspective. And so, so that happened. And that's how we first found out. But of course, we were really happy to see that it was being taken up by the New York's Attorney General office. And then we just didn't hear anything for a long time. So the investigation was years in the making. But we suspected, of course, maybe I haven't said this out loud, that it was the cable companies themselves, one of them or a bunch of them together. But we figured, this is not uncommon to do this kind of astroturfing in a process, unfortunately. And so, and it often goes undiscovered, or it's like never fully investigated, or, frankly, these these gigantic corporations are some of the biggest in the world, and they're really good at making sure there are no ties to the kind of shady firms that actually, facilitate this kind of, astroturfing. And so, I never really expected them to totally get a smoking gun, but the news, to get to the main headline from this week, Wednesday, was that they announced that they have proof that the nation's largest broadband companies, cable companies, were behind it, and that they funded this massive campaign of fraud, stolen names, in an attempt to influence the agency's net neutrality proceeding. It's Broadband for America specifically, and that's like, a big trade group that has the big telecom members behind it. And they're also implicated in funding, I think, 500,000 fake emails to Congress, again, to create the appearance of public support for the repeal.
I love how they call themselves Broadband for America. Like, and especially like in the context now of the infrastructure bills, like, let's give all that money to Broadband for America, or what have you, like how they name themselves the opposite of what they are.
Yeah. And of course, they all along, they say the reasons they oppose net neutrality is that makes it like harder for them to expand broadband and get more people access and stuff like that. They hide behind those kinds of arguments. And then, we look at what's happened in the last 4 years, and there's, been little to no investment in the infrastructure build out. So it's, yeah.
So what kind of result can we expect to see from this? Like, I know somebody in the comments was mentioning, is anybody going to go to prison for this? Are there going to be fines, perhaps? And something that I'm wondering is, could this affect net neutrality, given that the entire process was totally screwed up by these comments? Will there be another chance to try and get it back in light of that fact?
Yeah, I don't, I think we're going to get another chance just because we're, going to get a, new FCC chair and, and I think, the FCC will have, a majority of commissioners who are supportive of net neutrality, and hopefully we can even go even further than the Obama era rules. But yeah, it should. I mean, it's clear that the process was a sham. I think when you remove the fraudulent, that now we know truly fraudulent comments, 97% of the comments, legitimate comments that were submitted, were in favor of net neutrality. So,
which is just super overwhelming. I mean, what gets that ratio of support across the board? Like
any
nothing.
Issue area, any kind of issue in our country, in our country's history, it's probably the most popular piece of policy to ever have been. So yeah, you can see why they had to resort to these kinds of things. But yeah, we don't totally know, but we are going to be certainly pushing to make sure that that individual people are held accountable. One of the interesting things that the New York Attorney General's office said in their release was that they found that telecom higher-ups had multiple red flags, that the improbable flood of comments they were generating at an implausibly low cost were fraudulent, including news coverage, objections from one of their own vendors, and complaints from the victims themselves. And yet they continue to fund these operations. So, I don't know if they have enough information, yet to seek criminal charges, but hopefully they do, and we're interested in seeing what we can FOIA in terms of more information from the AG's office, so that we can start releasing this information to the public, because it's really important that everybody knows who was behind this and that they're held accountable. And we, around this same time, we were targeted as an organization with a really sophisticated phishing campaign. And so, we know that it was something called Dark Basin, which is it was a hacker for hire firm in India. And so, they should be looking into whether that can be traced back to Broadband for America or an individual telecom company to, again, like talk about, scary distraction for a group of people to feel like every day you couldn't trust the emails that were coming at you, and they were pretty sophisticated, and they were being sent to our staff's partners and other folks who don't work directly for the organization. So we're interested in seeing if they'll be able to make any connections there. But yeah, you can definitely be assured that we're going to continue to pursue this. We're talking to our friends at EFF about, possibly class action, or none of us are lawyers, but we're gonna talk to a lot of lawyers and figure out what can possibly be done.
And just to be clear for folks who might not be familiar with the terminology, the cyber attack launched by Dark Basin was something called a phishing attack, and the intention of that was to gain access to our private information, so our emails, our chat logs, everything. They were trying to gain access to the organization so they could subvert our projects from within. It was really, really nasty stuff. And for the record, so we can be clear, so that everybody knows, who were the organizations or the corporations that were represented by Broadband for America, or that are represented by them?
Oh, good question.
We don't know for sure. I know AT&T is one of them, but it's like the major broadband companies. That would be good. I would just love to I just want to say their name on the air.
I agree, but I don't want to say one that's not included.
Yeah.
We can look it up at the same time.
Sure.
AT&T, CenturyLink, Charter, CTIA, which is the Wireless Association, Comcast, Cox, NCTA, which is the Internet and Television Association, Telecommunications Industry Association, TIA, and US Telecom, the Broadband Association. Those are the BFA members.
I also pulled up their website to try to help find that list, and it's worth taking a look. Take action now to support the open internet. We fully support net neutrality. It's just such the lies on this website are a beautiful example of why we all need to have a fair, bring a fair amount of suspicion and knowledge to the things that we're taking action on as this totally gross organization is calling on folks to do.
Yeah.
What a scam. Wow.
And it shifted over time. Like when we were first working on net neutrality, they could say that they thought it was a terrible idea, but because it was so wildly popular, when I joined the organization, AT&T was issuing statements about how important, an open internet is, and that they're supporters of net neutrality, of course, but, not actually. So.
Yeah, they're like, well, our interests completely don't align with the public interest, and everyone's too educated about this, so I guess it's time to lie through our teeth and cheat.
Exactly.
So what's next for the victims here? Because there are numerous victims that were caught up in this situation. Do you think that they'll be we don't know 100% for sure, but do we think that there may be some legal avenue that they can take to try to get retribution for what happened? Or do you think there might be even a class action lawsuit or something like that?
Yeah, like I said, we're exploring all the options right now. And when lawyers are telling us that they don't think it's going to work, we're like, no, come on, there's got to be something. Let's think about this. So we don't totally know. Yeah, we're talking about, could it be possible to do a class action? Absolutely. If that's possible, that would be, I think, the internet is made for finding people who have been harmed and collectively taking action. So that could be really successful. We're looking at our own organization and the damages that we incurred just through having been, subpoenaed ourselves through this investigation, having done nothing wrong. May not be recourse there, but we're kind of looking at all of the options. So yeah, if you were, if you are interested in this, or you were yourself a victim, get in contact with us. Otherwise, follow us on Twitter or get on our email list and stuff. We'll definitely be following up on this to see what kinds of actions are possible.
Yeah, and I would say the best way to reach us is probably through team@fightforthefuture.org, and I have that email down in the description. So yeah, like Sarah said, if you were a victim of this, please reach out to us. We aren't 100% sure exactly what the next steps will be, but just reach out to us and we can keep you in the loop as things, make more sense and become clearer.
Hopefully this is reverberating around the world, these shady firms, the big companies that try to kind of influence these processes, through this tactic of astroturfing. This will hopefully make them think twice about that. So I think it goes beyond just this net neutrality fight too, in terms of the importance of really pushing back and kind of making sure that we can ensure, that there is true accountability for this at all levels.
So I just wanted to thank you, Sarah, and you, Lia, for joining me today. I think that's about all we have for this episode. I just want to remind folks to like this video if you like this content, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell for notifications so that you can get updates for when we go live in the future. We are also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, so if you'd rather listen to the podcast version of this or you miss an episode, you can check it out there. There's also a playlist of previous episodes if you'd prefer to watch it. You can text live to 68788, and we will text you when we go live in the future. Once again, Sarah, thank you. Lia, thank you for joining us. We do this every Friday at 1 o'clock Eastern time. So you can so you can catch us here usually at 1 p.m. on Fridays. Next week is a maybe. We'll keep folks in the loop. The organization is going to be having a retreat, so I'm not entirely clear if there's going to be an episode next week, but we will definitely be tweeting and we'll send emails about that if that is the case. Thanks for joining us this week, and we will see you again soon. Bye. Okay, we're off air.